Well, Hans, by now I'm guessing that most people have seen this sort of mea culpa letter out of Zuckerberg, Facebook, effectively admitting that, just like everybody said, once again, that Facebook took a number of actions, that they were censoring the COVID information on behalf under pressure from the Biden regime, which we'll touch on, and also that that Facebook actually was indeed censoring information about the Hunter laptop. Now, the tenor of his letter is effectively this admission that they caved to government pressure that was placed on him. It almost appears that Zuckerberg is effectively begging for forgiveness, and that he was, almost as much of a victim as the people that he perpetrated this on, as he actively censored Americans. But that raises the real question. If we go through and actually look at Zuckerberg's actions, Facebook actions over the last, I don't know, let's call it a decade or so, what does that actually look like? Is he really sorry, or is he just sorry that he's been exposed?
It's the latter, and the timing, of course, suggests that it is, because everything in that letter, you and I knew right from the start. I mean, I know we'll get into some more detail here in a moment, but just to maybe pick out one right off the bat, so that to sort of illustrate how fake the whole thing is he tries to justify what they did 4 years ago. So yeah, the government censored us, but we also, this sort of, anyway, the we also is that he claims that we gave the laptop information to our fact checkers, and they said, oh yeah, it's probably Russian disinformation. So essentially, he is justifying what the government did in a roundabout way by saying that his own fact checkers agreed, and that they did have some agency themselves, because they went to the fact checkers and they did all these things. Well, that is just a complete lie. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe he went to some fact checkers, but the idea that these fact checkers confirmed anything about this being a Russian plot, the laptop, is just a total lie, because you and I, we were there on the spot at the time, back in October of 2020, and we knew immediately that this thing is real. We knew it for a number of reasons, and we don't have to rehash the whole thing. The tape recordings of Hunter talking to himself, Hunter going on these long car rides where he just talks about his life and all that kind of stuff. I mean, no AI was good enough in 2020 to make all that up, and certainly not a Russian one. But even if we cast that aside, we had absolute proof that it was real, because we had other emails from other people on the email chains that then appeared on the laptop, which of course then confirmed that at least all those emails were real, because the other side had them. So anyway, the idea that Mark Zuckerberg confirmed anything is just ludicrous. So that tells me the whole thing isn't a mea culpa at all.
Well, and a couple more points on that. One of the things Zuckerberg said is that they sent it as well to outside fact checkers and then never heard back, as if that's some kind of an excuse. How convenient is that? So, let's get this straight. You tell everybody that you're going to get this thing fact checked. You then send it both internally and externally. You hear nothing back externally, but yet a no answer on a crucial question is somehow enough to go ahead and censor everybody on Facebook. So, that falls on its face. The idea of the laptop itself, you're right. We were validating this stuff in real time, which I think is part of the reason why they kind of constructed a secondary argument, which was, well, maybe some of the things on the laptop are real, but the laptop itself, the aggregate file, what have you, is maybe somehow fabricated. And of course, we had the intelligence agencies out there, including 5 former CIA directors, making the case that the thing was Russian disinformation. But there's one more element that makes this so much worse. And that's the fact that there was this, we've talked about this before, this Aspen Group meeting that took place in September. And what that was done is that was established to set up preparation for the release of Hunter's laptop. Now, by this time, the FBI already had the thing in its possession for a long time, since December of the prior year, and they knew about it all the way back to July of the prior year. But the people that were at this meeting was a combination of all things, reporters who had copies of the laptop but weren't reporting on it. They were rather participating in an exercise to figure out how they could keep that information from coming out in the election. But there was also people from social media companies. Yoel Roth from then Twitter was there. but so were a sequence of unnamed Facebook executives that were part of this exercise. So they factually knew in September that the laptop was real. Moreover, they were part of the process of literally laying out preparations for how do we kind of counter the story. So, for Zuckerberg to claim that he was sort of a victim of the disinformation and the fact checkers not responsive, it's an outright lie.
It's just not credible that just random people like you and I, and of course there were a bunch of others, easily, very, very easily figured out that this whole thing was real. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about each and every one of the 30,000 files or however many there were, but enough kind of spot checks to determine that, yeah, this thing is real. Plus, we had the salesman over in the repair shop, Mac Isaac, right? You had his story. I mean, everything aligned. So it's just not possible that a bunch of random people can just figure this out, but Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, all these people cannot figure it out. That just didn't happen. They knew exactly what was going on. But of course, I completely agree with you. That's still on a kind of a lower tier, on a lower level of badness, of nefariousness than what the FBI did. Because as you said, they knew this thing was real in December of 2019. And they, meaning the FBI, they went to Facebook and to these other organizations and said, oh, there's this Hunter laptop thing, and that's fake. And, if it comes out, just be warned. That actually happened. And I think we don't talk enough about that. We don't talk enough that when you talk about election interference, oh, Vladimir Putin bought like $100 worth of ads in 2016. Oh my goodness, compare. By the way, I don't. That whole story is sort of, we can discuss that some other time, but let's just assume it's true.
Yeah. But
how does that even begin to compare to the FBI going into social media companies, telling them to censor a story which is bad for Biden, but which they know to be true?
And that I always like to come back to that because it is indeed so damning. The FBI was notified by Mac Isaac back in July. And then they wait to take possession of the laptop, although I'm sure they had copies of it. There was some sense that they may have gotten files from Isaac at the time, but we're not positive of that. But when Giuliani starts going public and talking about the laptop, that's when the FBI decides to move. And they take physical possession of the laptop in December. And then we have to fast forward, we're talking almost a year, 10 months in advance of the laptop being released, the story by the New York Post. And then they go to Facebook. And again, Facebook executives were at a meeting the month before where they were told that this is real. And if you're Facebook, let's just pretend none of that happened. Let's just pretend you're Facebook and the FBI comes to you and says, hey, we think something might be coming out. It's Russian disinformation. Then the laptop hits. Facebook makes their public announcement. Andy Stone, that piece of shit, saying that he's going to not allow any stories of that on the site, but that they're going to fact check it. Wouldn't your first fact check be to go to the FBI who warned you about this and say, hey, is this what you're talking about? Even yes or no, let the FBI lie. There was no responsive act from Facebook. So don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. They never came back on that.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely, and yeah, there's the other one, the Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, a former Clegg. He was a Facebook executive. He had gone from. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how these big government honchos keep ending up with social media gigs.
Always in crucial spots, right?
Right, exactly. So he went over to Facebook. He was there at the time, pulling the strings. Not a Trump fan, quite the opposite. You had at Twitter, you had James Baker, of course, the FBI counsel. That's a story in and of itself. How did he end up there? Again, how do all these people end up with these lovely gigs? But
how about Andy Stone himself? Andy Stone, the communications director, that guy was a DNC operative running a DNC PAC to try and turn the House blue, make it all Democrats. That was his immediate prior job.
That's right. So it's not just that's even just a smaller part where they get a nice gig, where they can have a big salary and do little work. It's also the fact that they're kind of, it's almost like they're planted there or placed there in order to act as sort of gatekeepers. And again, it's not some big conspiracy. the mere fact that it's always going in the same direction, that all these people are all Trump haters and are all globalists, or whatever word you want to attach to them, they all are of the same ilk. The mere fact that all these people are placed in these companies and no other people just guarantees the outcome. You don't even have to tell them what to do. You don't have to tell Clegg, go in and censor the Hunter Biden laptop, or James Baker, censor they know what to do. You don't have to tell them.
That's a whole story unto itself, right? Because you're not just talking about the incredibly powerful social media companies, big tech. You're also talking about all of media. And we've discussed this before, this crossover where you have, it's almost this seamless interaction between DNC operatives in the media and big tech, to the point where I think a lot of times it almost hurts us to discuss them as separable items when really they're the same people. If you stop looking at them as classifications, journalists, big tech, DNC, and start looking at who the individuals are, it's all a circular diagram that encompasses all of those things. They flow back and forth effortlessly. The media, for example, instead of taking references from the intelligence community, our sources in the IC tell us, they just decided to bring members of the intelligence community on as paid contributors. And those same people also went over to big tech. So that's the dynamic, the backdrop that we're working against. And of course, Zuckerberg tries to pretend like that's not the case in his letter.
And he downplays this whole point that we mentioned a few moments ago here, which is the fact that the FBI influenced, well, more than influenced, they turned the election, they turned the 2020 election. And I always felt that because they failed in 2016 with trying to get Hillary elected, probably because they were too confident that it was going to happen anyway. So they put their thumb on the scale, but not like overly. This is back in 2016.
2016,
little things,
right.
So obviously Comey absolving Hillary in her email affair is one. Later on, Comey absolving, the whole the 600,000 emails they found on Wiener's laptop. They stepped in and did a few things. Obviously, they spied on the Trump campaign, mainly, I think, to find out what opposition research they had. Like, did Trump actually have access to those Hillary Clinton emails, the ones
right.
from
Did
her
he
home
really have
the but let's face it. There wasn't the leaks were. There were some leaks. You had the various stories. Washington Post, of course, Nakashima. You had Isikoff. You had various bits and pieces, but you didn't have this kind of full onslaught prior to the 2016 election from the FBI side. Because I think Hillary was 10 up in the polls, and they just thought, well, we're doing our thing here, but we don't need to do too much because she's going to win anyway. But then obviously Trump won, and 2020 was kind of their chance at a makeover or do-over. And what they did is they really, really put their thumb on the scale in a way that is just indescribable. Even just now, thinking about it 4 years later, I still can't believe that actually happened. That the FBI went to social media companies and said, hey, there's this Hunter laptop story, and make sure you don't allow that to be run on your platforms because it's fake, it's Russian propaganda. When they had the damn laptop for, as you said, at least 10 months, they knew about it for a year and a half. They had confirmed it for at least 10 months, that it was real. And they not only concealed that, or that's one thing, the FBI conceals a lot of things. We know that from Russiagate. But they actively went out there and lied to the social media companies in order to get this thing suppressed, with the express goal of getting Biden elected, which is exactly what they achieved. We had poll after poll after the election, different companies different polling companies that all came out with the same result. If people had known that Biden corruption was real, that the laptop was real, that Biden had actually met people like Pojarski from Burisma, that means Joe Biden, the thing he kept lying about during the campaign, and on and on and on, Trump would have easily won. And that's even considering fortification and ballot harvesting and all that kind of stuff. Never mind that. He would have won anyway, because it would have, I think it was like a 5-6% turnaround on that. And even if it was only half that, or even a quarter that, it would have still been enough to win easily. So that is what kind of grates me the most, that this actually happened, that the FBI actually did that, and that we hardly ever talk about it. And this is not the first occasion that we have to talk about it, that now that Zuckerberg has admitted that the FBI came and told them that lie. It was really last year when David Wise, in his prosecution of Hunter, which in its, we've talked about this previously on the show, which is itself a kind of a huge story of corruption, how he was basically forced to bring these charges. Well, while this case was going on, I think July of last year, and then again this year, the FBI submitted the laptop into evidence in the trial, and there was no objection from the Hunter team. So at that point, obviously, again, it's confirmed. This is like the 100th time we've confirmed it. But why do we not talk about, you and I talk about it, but why is this not like the story of the century, that the FBI literally turned the 2020 election on its head to give Joe Biden the win?
Yeah, I think there's as you said, I think there's a very, very good case to be made that if that hadn't happened and everything else happened, all the other efforts of the Democrats aside, which is substantial. Just go read that Time magazine article about, a retrospective look at the 2020 election. It's astonishing what's actually disclosed there. But even if you allowed all of that to happen and just took out the FBI's actions, I think the election, even with all the, massive cheating, et cetera, I think that, Trump would have won. And like you said, it's the actions of an official organization, and it just doesn't get examined. Zuckerberg also was talking about some other things as well, because it didn't just stop with the FBI. And again, I don't think we can say enough that Zuckerberg, he's portraying the martyr throughout his letter. Like, poor me, I was under pressure from the FBI. But again, never went back and asked the FBI for answers and then responded. He just kind of accepted what they said, took his actions, and let things play out. But he did a couple other things as well. He also talked about how he privatized. He didn't put it that way, but he talked about his contributions, his financial contributions. And in his letter, he tries to portray it very nicely that my goal was always just to provide access for those who might otherwise have had difficulty voting in the election, et cetera, et cetera. If you read his letter, it sounds very generic and, kind of just, I was trying to be a good guy and maybe something went a little awry. I won't do that again. But, I was altruistic in my efforts. Well, that's just not true. It was almost $500 million to local election boards in only the key states to turn out likely Democratic voters. That was what he was doing. And, to put that into perspective, Zuckerberg spent almost as much funding, governmental election offices as the entire federal government spent on the 2020 election. It wasn't like he came in at the margins and just, helped out with a little bit of contributions. This was a massive, massive funding gift to the DNC. Where was it here? I remember something. So Zuckerberg claimed in his recent letter that his efforts were nonpartisan, but it was really almost like a private takeover of government elected offices. And if I remember correctly, in some states, some of these offices were later, some of these contributions were later found out to have been illegal. I think Wisconsin was one of those where the contributions were actually ruled to have violated bribery laws. So, it wasn't that he came in and was altruistic. He came in with an enormous purse, an enormous wallet, spent a huge amount of money only in the key battleground states, all with the guise of trying to help Democrats. Holy.
Isn't it ironic that despite spending, 450 million in the key states to get Biden elected, the one thing that actually did it was censoring the laptop story, which was free. You could just press the button over at Facebook and boom, it's done. But yeah, I mean, it's astonishing that so many people bought into this mea culpa narrative the past few days here, instead of saying, hey, everything you just said, sorry, this is 4 years late, number one. Number two, you knew about all this. And number three, most importantly, you're the guy who tried to swing the election. Even if we forget about the laptop and we forget about the censorship, you tried to swing the election with your 400 million. So what's this about now? There's just no basis whatsoever for believing a word, trusting a word, or whatever, which then leads us to ask, well, why is he doing this and why is he doing it now? Now, before we discuss that, I mean, I thought there was another aspect of the letter which I really didn't like at all, even if it had been sent 4 years ago, which is but all our decisions were our own, and we own our own decisions and so on. So the government forced us, but we also, that sort of, those two positions are not compatible. So why does he put that in that letter? It's almost like he wants to have his cake and eat it. It's just, it's completely ridiculous.
Well, one thing also is that he completely ignores, he says he was pressured in 2020. And we know from some of the emails, there's some truth to that, but there's another aspect that he entirely ignored. And that was his outreach and work with Anthony Fauci. Is
Of
that
course, yeah.
Facebook went to Anthony Fauci, Zuckerberg himself, not Facebook, Zuckerberg, went to Anthony Fauci in March 2020 and said,
And
what can we
he
do?
initiated it. This is very, very important. It wasn't Fauci who initiated it. Zuckerberg
Right.
initiated
Zuckerberg reached out to Fauci and emailed him on March 15th, 2020, offering to get Fauci's message out and to partner with Fauci on establishing a coronavirus information hub on Facebook. And Fauci responded to Zuckerberg saying that proposal sounded terrific. There's another idea that we don't know about. Fauci endorsed it, but unfortunately what Zuckerberg was proposing was redacted. So we don't know what that information actually was. But, Fauci literally said that I'm going to give you a special point of contact, you at Facebook. And they established this entire hub. And there's where things shift, because just a few weeks later in April 2020, that's where all the COVID censorship on COVID began. Just a couple weeks after speaking with Fauci, after being told that they would assist each other and that Fauci would provide a conduit, a direct person assigned to Facebook. And then boom, the censorship begins on Facebook in early April.
Exactly. And I always wonder in that respect, I don't want to kind of digress too much here, how much the origin question played a role. Zuckerberg is, of course, known for sucking up to Xi Jinping, China, big time. Lots and lots of incidents over the past, a few years, or actually even before COVID. The lab leak was out there, but it was, it was Xiao Baotou, right? In early February of 2020, the Chinese whistleblower who published a paper saying, it came out of a lab. And then, of course, that paper was pulled. Luckily, we had it archived. At that point, the suppression of that story kind of became a big thing. I always wonder how much of that was sort of preemptive, that even on Zuckerberg's part, like, oh, we can't have that, that would be horrible for China if that came out. I don't know this to be true, but I do think that various people, not just Fauci, that's my point, were already working very hard back in February, March of 2020 on kind of ensuring that story never gets out, or at least when it does get out, it never gets entrenched in any way. And then, so when Trump came out in April of 2020 and said, it came out of a lab, they were prepared to push back.
Well, there's an interesting backdrop to all this, because all of the timing coalesces around April in terms of the sudden pushback. Well, what was going on behind the scenes of that? I always come back to one particular instance that took place in March, and that was the State Department coming out with their own internal assessment that very much indeed COVID had originated out of the Wuhan lab. And moreover, this assessment by the State Department, which never saw the light of day, Pompeo made sure of that, also said that all the other theories that were being put forth were basically red herrings. They were designed to distract from the true cause, that it came from the Wuhan lab. So not only did they assess that, yes, it came out of the Wuhan lab, but they said that all the other narratives were fictitious creations intentionally designed to distract. And, so just as that was done, that's when all the efforts ramped up. And when I said it never saw the light of day, that's not entirely true. The reason that they were probably responsive to that is there was one article on that email. There was a reporter who got a hold of that, wrote a story on it, and that's when all the efforts began in earnest. Over at the intelligence community, they issued a statement right as Trump was saying that, hey, I think it came out of the Wuhan lab. The intelligence community, through Grinnell's office, issued a statement saying, "Now that's all horseshit. It's not. We see no evidence of it being man-made or genetically modified. Blah blah blah." And Facebook's efforts in April, all of that happened when the first hint of disclosure was made of that State Department email. And then we never heard of it again. That narrative was effectively not narrative, the reality, the truth that it came out of the Wuhan lab. That was overwhelmed, cemented over, and kept hidden for the next year.
100%. That was a seminal moment in April. And I think the State Department, of course, but then Trump saying it was sort of the trigger. And then whatever they had planned kicked in, including Grinnell. And that was, by the way, that's not talked about. That was not good for Trump, what Grinnell did. That was really, really bad. He basically said the exact opposite of what Trump was saying in a formal DNI, statement. There's a little add-on right at the bottom, like we'll keep our eyes and ears open. I'm paraphrasing here, but just sorry, no, that doesn't. Which I think he cited in the past as saying, no, we, this was an open statement. No, it wasn't. As you said, the statement said no evidence of anything lab, no evidence of anything engineered, and so on, which is simply objectively untrue and was untrue then and was known then. But you're absolutely right. As soon as that happened, as soon as Trump said it probably came out of a lab, everything kicked into action and the whole thing was completely buried, to the point of when you go back to sort of the latter part of 2020, it wasn't talked about at all. It wasn't a topic of the election at all. It wasn't mentioned at all.
No.
It was kind of revived a bit in November of 2020 after the election, when the paper came out by Yuri Dagin and Rosanna Segreto, which forensically showed that this thing probably came out of the lab in a very, very detailed way. And there was another paper by Roland Wiesendanger, the professor, the German professor, in January of 2021. And then, of course, we had the Fauci emails in June of 2021. But it was just that's how it kind of started opening up again. But you're absolutely right. They effectively shut it down for at least 8, 9, 10 months or whatever. And I don't think they started planning that at the point when Trump spoke up. I think that had been in the works for a while. And I'm sure Zuckerberg was part of that. And that was probably part of why he reached out to Fauci in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, just a real quick synopsis of that story is the State Department email assessment gets written. There's one story that's done on it. I think it's Bill Gertzman. Anyway, one story gets out. Immediately, Grinnell assembles, without ever referencing that, but that's the timing. He assembles a committee of all the intelligence agencies and says, I want your formal assessment of it. Meanwhile, in April now, Trump is starting to build up to saying officially that it came out of the Wuhan lab. At press conferences, he's dropping these very kind of overt hints. The day that he decides to publicly declare that that COVID definitely came, he'd seen evidence that COVID came out of the Wuhan lab, is the day that Grinnell released the report from the intelligence community. Now, it's not Grinnell's report. Everything's funneling into his office, and then they collate it and prepare the official statement, and they issued it. And Grinnell issued it like while Trump was beginning his press conference, or just moments before. And he did it without notifying Trump. How do we know that? Because Trump went out into the press conference and started to say that I have seen evidence that COVID came out of the lab, and he was immediately pushed back from reporters who all had copies of the DNI statement saying that the intelligence community, says otherwise. And it just stopped Trump in his tracks. There wasn't much he could say with the intelligence community saying the complete opposite. It didn't matter what he said. It was invalidated. And the statement was written in a way that, the IC could use it as they saw fit. So they did. But Facebook was all a part of that.
Absolutely. Coming back to Zuckerberg, again, not trying to be conspiratorial, but there's certainly an issue to be explored here where, do you remember how the Chinese government tried to establish a back channel to Fauci early on? And they used this company called Evergrande, the property company in China.
The now bankrupt Ponzi scheme Evergrande.
Well, it always keeps living on somehow. I don't know how they do it, but it's been, that's right. It's
bankruptcy, you go through reformulation, but yeah.
So they got Evergrande to go through someone at Harvard. Well, they promised
President of Harvard
a lot of money, and the price was to have to open a back channel between one of their guys in China and Fauci. and the outreach happened at all. We don't know what happened. We know that this thing was initiated in accordance with Chinese wishes. We don't know what communications there were between Fauci and the Chinese side. We've never seen any of those. But they
we
would have
do know that
probably.
call took place.
But then again, we've never seen Fauci's Gmail, which he lied about, that he said he didn't have it or he never used it. And then it turns out he did, because eventually, years later, we saw some emails that he was using with certain reporters on Gmail, trying to keep it away from FOIA. Anyway, bearing that in mind, that the Chinese literally tried to bribe someone to get a back channel to Fauci, it's kind of odd, isn't it, that Zuckerberg at around the same time also tries to reach out to Fauci with his own kind of Chinese connections. Again, I don't know more than that. It's just something I'm going to throw out there. That's it's just curious how that happened.
Yeah, but again, I think, there's so many interesting sub stories to all this. It's easy to for us to start talking about them. So we maybe went a little astray, but one of the overarching points is that Zuckerberg wasn't a victim here. Yeah. He was eager in all of this. He ran to Fauci. I'll do anything you want me to do. What can I do to help? And he did it. And the timeline proves exactly that. But, there's another element to this story that people often forget about, because I was sort of approaching this from, I did a big thread. I did a big thread recently, and just trying to explore what happened, and said, okay, it's clear that Zuckerberg's sort of asking for forgiveness. Is he deserving of forgiveness? And it's worth looking at what they've actually done over the years. And in this case, one of the posts that I sent, I went back to 2012 to the Obama campaign. And, what Zuckerberg did back then is he went to the Obama campaign and he gave them unfettered access to their entire database. And that sounds bad now, but transport yourself mentally back to 2012 when Facebook was like it. That was the big thing. If you wanted the holy grail of a database of information on Americans, Facebook was the place to be. And, there were some interesting comments that came out from the Obama campaign. Carol Davidson, later said some things that were surprising. We ingested the entire U.S. social graph. We scraped everything that we possibly could. And then talking about Facebook, saying Facebook came to our offices in the days following. And I'm quoting here. This isn't me. This is a quote. And we're very candid that they allowed us to do things that they wouldn't have allowed someone else to do because they were on our side, end quote. Now, I guess one of the things that jumped to my mind, not only does that show, I guess the major point of that is that shows where Zuckerberg's allegiance lies, that he's trying to help Democrats. He certainly didn't offer the same thing to Republicans. But there's another kind of ongoing theme. Is like, why wasn't that classified as an in-kind contribution? The value of that monetarily was immense, and it was just gifted to the Obama campaign, and Republicans were excluded. Why wasn't that accounted for as an in-kind contribution? It's those kind of things in our election laws, or lack of enforcement of our election laws, is always in favor of Democrats. That is also kind of mind-numbing.
And then, unfortunately, in 2016, Brad Parscale, the digital director of the Trump campaign, did a really smart thing. He did something similar to what the Obamas did in 2012, but he paid for it. he went to sort of the commercial way of doing it, down the commercial path in terms of what Facebook allows or allowed at the time, in terms of targeted advertising and so on. So he didn't get like the freebies like like Obama got, but in any case, he got it done, and it was highly effective. But then stupidly, he went to the media and bragged about what he had done.
And what happened?
Remember that Facebook shut it down then, claiming all this had been abused, and this Cambridge Analytica and Russia and all these kind of reasons they came up with. And, that was a huge shame as well. But again, you're right, always in the same direction. But,
but that's just all part of the path I was talking about. 2012 for free to Obama. 2016, Parscale's smart, but he has to buy it. And then as soon as that goes public, there's a freak out, and Facebook rescinds everything.
Right.
Because, of course, we can't be helping Republicans, even if they're paying us. Then we have 2020, or the lead up to the 2020 election, where Zuckerberg is doing the FBI's bidding and censoring the Hunter laptop. Then we move into 2020 itself, after the election, 2021, pardon me. And we have, well, actually in 2020, Zuckerberg starts censoring the COVID story, the COVID origin story, while Trump is still president. And then as we move into 2021, those efforts continue. And of course, Zuckerberg's massive funding for the Joe Biden campaign. So,
Right. So
at every single election stop since at least 2012, Zuckerberg and Facebook have been heavily involved in every single election. And it has always been 100% in favor of Democrats, often to the extreme detriment of Republicans.
right, and that has not changed. That will
Yeah.
never change. So this brings us kind of back to our original question here, then, which might be a good one to close it out on. Why is he doing this now? Why did he write that letter, and why did he do it now?
Well, I think here's my answer to that. First of all, I think it's beyond clear that he's not sorry for what he did.
Right.
He's sorry he got caught.
Right.
But it's probably worth stepping back slightly, because Zuckerberg already admitted this. I think some of our viewers probably realize this, that this isn't actually new information. This is just a formal apology letter, and the timing itself may be important. But Zuckerberg made the admission on Joe Rogan a ways back. And once again, that wasn't a mea culpa. The reason that he made that admission on Rogan was because the House committee was actively working and was just about to issue a report on these matters in terms of the interaction with the pressure from the FBI, the pressure from the Biden administration. Zuckerberg knew it, got out in front of it on Joe Rogan of all places. He suddenly turns up for the first time on Rogan's podcast, admits that this happens, and then the House report, which he was fully aware of, hits a month later? I mean, it was, right on top of it. So, and we already knew we knew it was in the works. It wasn't like a secret. You and I have written about that a number of times. So that's why Zuckerberg made the admission. And now he's making it again. Why? Because you've got lawsuits by AGs like Andrew Bailey and others.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only explanation that makes sense, because we know he's not a real mea culpa. It's not because he suddenly. Some people have said, "Oh, he's preemptively kind of covering himself, for a Trump win. If Trump wins because he doesn't want to get in trouble or whatever." I don't think that's his thinking at all. Obviously, we don't know what his thinking is, but given what he's been doing for the past 10, 12 or so years. I think he wants to use the next 60 or so days to ensure that Trump does not win. I don't think he's thinking so far ahead that he's kind of thinking, oh, I better cover myself in case Trump wins. That's not on his mind. He wants to ensure that Trump does not win. That's the main thing. In the case of covering himself, if and when that happens, when Trump wins, you can still deal with things in November, December. There's plenty of time to, build bridges or whatever. So I don't buy that explanation at all. I think yours is much, much more cogent, that this probably has to do with ongoing legal issues that he has.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull it up here. I may not get to the tweet, but Attorney General Andrew Bailey just tweeted recently that Zucker bucks may be over, but Biden bucks are not. It's why we filed suit. Yeah. And he issued another tweet where he was effectively saying, "Oh, here it is, right here. Mark Zuckerberg's apology for censoring the American people rings hollow for the hundreds of thousands who remain shadow banned on his platforms. I haven't forgotten. Our work to preserve free speech is just getting started." And then he goes on to say that when we obtained I've got the wrong tweet. Pardon me. Here it is. He's sending out Zuckerberg's letter, and what he says is he regrets it because our lawsuit exposed it. He was caught red-handed. So again, that's what I think is the real reason. And I agree with you. I don't think he's, I don't know. It's possible it's in the back of his mind. Who knows? Like you said, we can't read his mind. But the primary motivation for this is repeating the pattern that he did when he went on Joe Rogan, is getting out in front of the information and issuing a statement before the lawsuit breaks wide open. That's all this is.